Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Todd Fernandez with Climate Crisis Policy, and I'll be your host today. Thank you all for joining us to discuss the most important organizing challenge humanity has ever faced: how to unite in common cause, to join as one humanity to protect our sacred planet. In this opening session, we'll welcome several elected officials and other experts to discuss the federal climate legislative strategy in the United States. And in the ensuing 2 days, over 40 leaders will dig into this issue, sharing the current strategies and structures. We'll explore a new path to create and file a comprehensive climate bill together and hear from MIT and Drawdown about how scientists can help us calculate the projected greenhouse gas reduction impacts of proposed legislation, and then monitor the progress in real time so we know it's working. We'll also talk about building coalition infrastructure, like the healthcare and immigration movements, to combine our power and unleash the thousands of groups and millions of activists ready to sacrifice everything to save nature and protect paradise from the love of money. And we'll close with the climate cabaret of New York City's best, performing live from their homes around the country. Welcome as we create a plan for unity that will make the scientific solutions politically mandatory by changing the political reality from the outside until we are confident and clear that a new trajectory has been forged for our home, the incredible, miraculous planet Earth, from which all of us and all of nature is born and nourished with abundance. Now is the time for humanity to protect Mother Earth. The challenge is not the opposition or science, it's the internal conversation among us, among organizations. If we can unite, everything else is possible. Again, thank you and welcome all as we create new hope together. This symposium is dedicated to our beloved and recently passed Dee Ahern, a relentless, joyful activist and djembe drummer who put a heartbeat in everything she did. Welcome, Dee, and all our activist ancestors. This is for you. To open the symposium, it is a profound honor to welcome Clyde Hall, Director of the Naraya Cultural Preservation Council. Thank you and all the stewards of the Neriah for the spiritual blessings it bestows. And thank you so much for joining us today. Your being here means the world to me, and it's a wonderful way to launch our quest for unity. Welcome, Clyde.
San Bejo. Nanange it's the Harrison of Mubisepia at Clyde Hall. It's in a Noah Ekamaitinus and in a Sonda Nua Sosone Bannock Tribe, Pot Hall, Idaho. Let's see. My friend Charlie Patton, who's a Mohawk chief and elder, always said that you had to greet people in your own language to know how people know who you are. And as I said, my name is Clyde Hall. I have many Indian names, but and I come from the Shoshone-Bannock tribes in Fort Hall, Idaho. And as I was introduced, the executive director for the Shoshone-Bannock tribe. And they asked me to give a little thoughts and perhaps a prayer to start everything off. And so I will do that. One of the things that I'd like to point out is a quote from Chief Seattle. Whatever happens to the earth, and I might add to the daughters of the earth, or whatever happens to the earth happens to the sons, and I might add to the daughters of the earth. And the Indian people, we don't try to fix things. We try to work in harmony with nature. For years and years, the people in decades, eons, the Native people realized that you have to work in harmony. The earth itself is everything is round. Everything goes in a circle, and nothing is higher or lower than anything else. And so everything is related. Plants, trees, animals, everything that lives on the earth. And it works in a perfect synchronistic harmony. And so in your discussions today, one of the things to bear in mind is we're going to talk about doing all this legislation and all this other things to help. And that's exactly what it is a help. It's not a fix. The earth will fix itself if we can enable it and be conducive to having a synchronistic harmony with it. And so bear that in mind, please, people, when you're talking and discussing these matters, that we can help if we go along. Everything in balance. Everything has to be in balance. And that way things will work. Things will click on it. And so I'll say a short prayer for the beginning of this, and I'll be along with you in and out for the next 2 days. So we'll see. Damanapa, Damabia, Damasonda Sopa, Nikamite. This in Adaptation is on. This in the Harrison and Angus. Damanapa, Damabia. It's in the sound of is on. It's in the Kamite. Let's see. What I said was that may the spirits, the things that are here living with us on this earth, that they come and listen to us today, that they guide our talks, that they guide our minds, and that they guide everything that we do, and look upon us in favor, and look upon us in a good way. And always add this, son dias, that means have pity on us, take pity on us with what we're doing today, and guide us in the appropriate steps and the appropriate actions to change what we can and enable what we can in our mission today. So I'd like to thank you, and I wish you well on this quest that you're going to do today. And so I'd like to say that. And Usian, that means may the Spirit be with you. Oh.
Oh.
There we are.
Thank you so much, Clyde. I'm so grateful that you're here. And I know now Spirit is welcome to the dance, and we're so happy to have you.
Hi, greetings, folks.
Hello, Senator Merkley, you're up next. It's so great to meet you and have you here with us. My name is Todd Fernandez, and I'm hosting, and I'm going to do a quick introduction. Next, folks, we're very excited to welcome Senator Jeff Merkley. Senator Merkley is a champion of movements, always ready to file vanguard legislation. In 2015, Senator Merkley became my hero as the lead sponsor of the Equality Act, which I worked very hard to get filed, and which passed the House in 2019 and now needs the Senate to become law. This bill will add sexual orientation, gender identity, and sex to the 1964 Civil Rights Law, finally protecting the LGBTQ two-spirit community and women from legal discrimination. I'm 56 and still waiting for basic equality under the law, so I am hopeful this will happen soon. And Senator Merkley is a climate legislative champion too, as we all know, headlining the Keep It in the Ground bill, the 100 by 50 bill, and the Good Jobs for the 21st Century Energy Act. His leadership is a guiding inspiration. Senator Merkley, today in this symposium, we'll be talking about legislative strategy and possibly crafting a comprehensive climate bill together through an open community process to serve as a gold standard to rally the millions of climate activists to change what's possible politically. So we welcome your thoughts on that. and are also very excited to hear your vision and plan for what climate goals we can fight for in the immediate term. And most importantly, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on how we can connect the internal congressional plans with civil society and the grassroots, so we can mobilize outside action like what happened for a healthcare bill for your legislative agenda. And before you begin, I just have to give a shout out to your constituents, the incredible activists in Oregon who organized to invite you here. They are a model for the country. Bravo to them, and thank you so much for being with us and all you do to support visionary leadership. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much, Todd. Pleasure to join with you all, because however discouraged I become about how slowly we're progressing on an issue where we need bold, massive action, I see the building energy in grassroots America, people organizing in all kinds of ways to drive action. And that wave of that movement is going to wash over Washington, and there will be a turning point, but we need that turning point soon. We need it now. We need it with this coming administration. And so this conversation couldn't be more timely. Thank you to you and the folks at the Climate Crisis Policy. Here we are in a world that's in such deep trouble. 2020, just everything that happened this year accentuates the fact of where we stand is in a massive changes across the planet, really a global emergency. 2020 is going to be one of the top 3 hottest years ever recorded. The last 6 years are going to be the 6 hottest years. The last decade is going to be the hottest decade. It doesn't take a mathematician to recognize that the odds of that happening at random are nil. So this is just a sign of how fastly the planet is warming up. We've seen heat waves affect 80% of our oceans, record-breaking hurricane season. A different way of looking at it is how many named storms came across our border. 12 made landfall in the US, damage measured in billions of dollars. Or how about another vignette that the temperature recorded north of the Arctic Circle at Verkhoyansk reached 100.4 degrees, over 100 degrees north of the Arctic Circle. Or how about the fires across our country? I drove 600 miles up and down, north to south, and then south to north across Oregon, and never got out of the smoke this summer. 8.6 million acres have burned, 1 million of those acres in my home state. And the fire seasons just get longer and hotter, more difficult. We could go on about the acidity of the ocean affecting Oregon, the loss of the snowpack in the Cascades affecting our irrigation water and the health of our streams. You all know all these things, and you know that these impacts dramatically and disproportionately impact frontline communities, low wealth communities, indigenous communities, communities of color. They bear the brunt of the crisis. But when we talk policy, we often overlook those impacts on frontline communities, and we absolutely cannot do that. And I know all of you will make sure that those impacts are front and center as you ponder a legislative vision that you're working to assemble. So, Congress. Well, Congress has had a very few bills on the floor of the Senate this last 4 years. Very few amendments opportunities being allowed by the Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell. So frustrating indifference or even hostile resistance to the notion of tackling this planetary challenge. I'm really struck about the impact of 2014. 2014 is the first year in Senate elections that the dark money from Citizens United flowed in hundreds of millions of dollars across the land. It resulted in 6 seats getting flipped from blue to red, and thus the fossil fuel world really have become the puppet masters of the Republican caucus. And that is a tremendous problem. It means champions who were on the Republican side of the aisle may still feel the emergency in their heart, but they won't talk about it, and they won't initiate on it, and they won't partner on legislation on it. And they're hoping there'll be some other day, but they're not willing to buck the fact that the major driver of their power is dark money from the fossil fuel world. And of course, the Trump administration, a complete loss on this, never seen or willing to recognize the challenge that we're facing, characterizing it as a Chinese hoax and all of that. And thank goodness, as we get out of bed every day, let's just remember to be thankful that Joe Biden on January 20th will be the next president of the United States. It's a light at the end of that very dark tunnel. So here in Congress, we're going to keep pushing, and I'm really hopeful about Georgia because it'll be a lot easier to have a discussion in committees and a discussion on the floor if a climate-sensitive caucus is actually deciding what bills get hearings and what bills are considered, and the opportunity for amendments to push even faster and harder. So there's a group of sectors that we have to work on. As you mentioned, the Keep It in the Ground vision, we made significant progress under that, under the executive branch, under President Obama. The vision of my 100 by 50 bill, which is at the time was like, okay, we have to have a complete carbon neutral America by 2050, was seen as pretty radical. Now, I must say, given how fast the Earth is warming up, 2050 is probably too long from now. I attempted to get President Obama to plant a flag at Paris, saying the whole world has to get to carbon neutrality by 2050. Let's do it together. Well, we're going to have in 2021 a gathering in Scotland. I think we need to plant that flag there, saying that the entire world has to work together to carbon neutrality, and probably a date earlier than 2050. There were some radical things I put forward in that bill, like, for example, ending the sale of fossil fuel cars. And people thought I was absolutely off the deep end crazy. But since then, since introduction of that bill, a dozen or more countries have laid out that it is their intention to stop the sale of fossil fuel cars, some by 2035, some 2030, 2040. And it's being discussed here. It's being discussed in California now as a policy. And we know that the transportation sector has to be electrified if we're going to make progress. So there's many different ways that can be tackled under the legislative process. Of course, a zero emission vehicle standard would be great. Increasing automakers to increase efficiency annually by 5% would be a way to approach it. We know that Trump administration finalized a rule to cut annual increase efficiency to just 1.5%, undoing bad rules from the Trump administration through the Congressional Review Act, another legislative strategy. And we are in the situation now where even the car industry is looking at the fact that everyone's getting an electric car onto the market. They see the vision of the way we are headed. I wanted to really understand this electric car world. And so in 2013, I bought a Volt, which was a hybrid, had about 35 to 40 miles on electricity. I own one Volt here in DC. We had a Leaf in Oregon, and now we have a Bolt with a B that has 230 miles of range. And I must say, when you realize how cheap they are to operate and the cost coming down on buying them, it is clear that this is getting primed for wide acceptance in America. I certainly know when I saw how much my wife loved her electric car, I knew that we were on the right path here. This was a feasible way to go. And you know, the cost of that extra fuel for fossil fuels, set aside the whole issue over the warming of the planet, that's a huge consumer cost. Electricity is just a much cheaper way to fuel your car. So I have introduced this past October a Zero Emission Vehicles Act. It would end the sale of fossil fuel cars by 2035. And let's continue to pursue that vision, push that vision forward. Let's think about the infrastructure and how we can build the infrastructure for the electric transportation revolution. Let's think about how we can proceed to expand the role of spending on mass transit. We have an 80-20 model where 80% of our money is spent on highways and 20% on transportation in terms of transit and so forth. How about changing legislatively that ratio to really move to many modes of moving about that don't involve fossil fuels? And of course, cities are experimenting with all kinds of things. Minneapolis and of Minnesota and Portland, Oregon often compete for being the most bicycle friendly. Now we have scooter programs popping up all over, walking lanes as well as biking lanes, all kinds of innovations. Let's take those best ideas and spread them around the country and give grants for adoption of those strategies. And let me mention electric buses. I will never support another grant in Oregon for another fossil fuel powered bus. We have got to push into that world. We've got to address the issue of surge pricing that sometimes discourages electric buses from the local utilities. Again, this is an area that legislation could address. And the technology is ripening. The first electric bus I was on was pretty clunky and hard to control the surges in energy, but I can tell you that's changed very, very rapidly. I think within 10 years, there should be no new diesel-powered transit bus in America. And we see how solar power is dropping in cost. Oh, enormously, dropping 77% since 2010. And wind power dropping down to as low as 2 cents per kilowatt hour. What a deal. We see utilities realizing that this is the path of the future. By the end of this year, the Energy Information Administration says we will have installed 37 gigawatts of wind and solar capacity. That's incredible. Obliterates the previous record of 17 gigawatts back in 2016. That's just, so looking at this year compared to then. We can keep that boom in renewables going. We could end the subsidies on fossil fuels so there's a level playing field. And then we could add on top of that rewards for not polluting our skies with carbon dioxide or methane, and thus subsidize the rapid move to renewables. Community solar projects are certainly something that should be supported through grants. Supporting cities adopting a 100% energy or carbon neutral strategy. Many cities have done it. Let's get every city to attempt to at least review the possibility of such a plan. You know, when I fly into Portland, and I have to admit that I have a massive carbon imprint moving back and forth between working in DC and living in Oregon. But I look out the window and I see all of those parking lots and I see all of those flat roofs on commercial buildings. And I go, why aren't we covering every flat roof with a solar panel? Why aren't we covering every parking lot with solar canopies? These can be done generating a lot of additional renewable electricity right close to where it's being used. We need the partnership of utilities that often fight distributed energy. They need to be partners with us in this, and we need to find a way to make that happen. So buildings are a big deal. We've got to address buildings. They are a lot of our CO2 emissions, changing the way that they're heated, changing the way that they're insulated, changing the way that they grab electricity through how they deploy solar panels or thin solar films, changing the efficiency of the windows. There is a lot that can be done on buildings. Right now, we have 179D, the Commercial Buildings and Energy Efficiency Tax Deduction, which helps building owners upgrade their buildings and reduce emissions by letting them deduct up to $1.80 per square foot for efficiency improvements, efficiency in heating, ventilation, HVAC, windows, lighting, so on and so forth. But that's the only federal incentive on the books, addressing our 5.6 million commercial buildings in America. We can do much more than that. So that should be, buildings should be a topic in any comprehensive bill. And by the way, I really like to see us advance cross-laminated timber products, building medium-sized buildings. I'm talking about 4 to 14 stories out of mass timber or CLT, cross-laminated timber or mass plywood is a much lower energy footprint than building out of concrete and steel. So let's pursue advancing that mass timber or CLT revolution in medium-sized buildings. I also wanted to mention that I had introduced years ago the Rural Energy Savings Program idea. And the idea was to have low-cost loans to energy co-ops, rural electric co-ops, who could then do low-cost loans near 0% to their customers to do energy saving improvements to their homes. And that way, the homeowner could benefit from using less energy, and of course, it's great for the relationship with the utility, and there's an easy on-bill way to collect the payments, and the payments are kind of offset by your energy savings. I remember Bill Clinton coming into our caucus and saying, we need a bill that provides rural utility co-ops with the ability to do low-cost loans for homeowners to do energy saving retrofits. And I was sending mind waves to Bill Clinton saying, I wanted him to say, and that's the bill that the new senator from Oregon has introduced. But he hadn't gotten that word. I did talk to his staff afterwards and say, hey, can you note that there is such a bill? Well, that bill now exists, Rural Energy Savings Program. It is funded. It's there. Let's expand that out of just the rural area to our urban areas with a community energy savings program, which I have now introduced, but that one's not yet passed and not yet funded. And we can make that happen. Energy efficiency, obviously a big part of the puzzle. I know you all won't ignore that. It's often cited as the most cost-effective way to reduce carbon footprint by reducing the energy required for many different tasks. And we can do that in the industrial sector. We can do that in the manufacturing sector. Now we have to recognize that carbon pollution, methane pollution is a tragedy of the commons of global scale. So everything that we do won't make a difference unless we work with the world to be partners in this. We need to be able to say to Trudeau and Canada that, you know what, you can't claim to be a climate champion if you're building an intermountain pipeline to put more tar sands oil into the world. And China, we know you're doing a lot of renewable energy back home, but pushing 200 new coal plants on poor countries around the globe is unacceptable. We need to say that the United States will not support the international financing of new fossil fuel projects. We talk about electrify Africa. Let's talk about electrify Africa with renewable energy. Let's talk about electrify the whole world with renewable energy. I was over in near Rwanda, Kenya, the Big Rift, and where there's a ton of geothermal energy that can be exploited and transported to different parts of Africa. And China was there pushing a new coal plant on Kenya. That doesn't make sense as we look at the collective effort of human civilization on this planet to tackle this challenge and tackle it very quickly. So we know legislation is tough. We know that at best there will be a 50-50 split in the Senate if depending on how Georgia comes down, which means we also have to look at everything the executive branch can do. And I do think we should say to the Joe Biden administration, you've talked a lot about a climate plan. It's terrific. We so much appreciate having been part of the efforts to prepare, to run your campaign, to present your campaign. All the signs are great, but realize that what you can do as the executive can be very, very important. So folks have been putting together a presidential plan on climate that could be many, many steps that could be adopted by the Biden administration. And so that is another front that we need to work on. And we need to think about this, how grassroots action and leadership inside the executive branch and the legislative branch matter, and how the two of them can work together. Because the movement inside the legislature will only be as strong as the wave of encouragement from mass action groups, grassroots groups across America. The best change, the most rapid change on urgent problems comes when there are champions inside the building and there's a mass wave of action outside the building demanding action. And that mass wave can also demand action directly from the new administration. I will say on the legislative front that I don't want anyone to be in the position of saying that the Democrats were in the majority, if we get those 2 seats in the majority, but we didn't act because Mitch McConnell, whose leadership and power is funded by the fossil fuel administration, had a veto power over the bills we get done. If we take the majority, we have to find a way to say that when it comes to the risk of the planet, we are not going to allow Mitch McConnell or anyone else to have a veto over what needs to be passed into law. Meanwhile, on the executive side, the president has the National Emergencies Act. It is a national emergency. It is a global emergency. Building a wall was an emergency for the Trump administration. He invoked Emergencies Act. Well, the Emergencies Act and the Defense Production Act come very handy here to direct resources where they need to get to move boldly and fast into the renewable energy future. So I look forward to working with all of you and seeing with all the ideas you come up with. There is so many different facets of the challenge that we can tackle. And we now have an administration, or we will on January 20th, that is ready to be partners with us. So let's be those partners, do everything we can, because there is no other planet that we can go to. I was struck by the scientific analysis that finds that the universe is so vast that there are literally, the best calculation we can make, more stars in the universe than grains of sand on our planet. That's just impossible to imagine. But there is no other place we can go to than our little blue-green planet on our one little star. We've got to avoid it being destroyed. And the path we're on right now is one of utter destruction. So I'm with you. I'm in partnership with you. This fight is so worth dedicating every bit of energy of your heart and mind and soul. We've got to be on the battlefield, and we have to win. Thank you so much for being on that battlefield. Take care. And let's go save planet Earth.
Bravo, Senator Merkley. Thank you so much. If you could hear, I'm sure the crowd out there, the almost 400 people are cheering you on with that litany of fabulous policy ideas. So I just want to ask one follow-up question because I know you have to go. So we're about strategy today. And so we got these policy dreams and aspirations. How can we formalize a process between Congress and civil society so we know like what 5 bills you think you want to fight for so we can start to get our armies in motion? We need to, I think, create a new process, a line of communication between the internal strategy and the public at large, not just our internal groups. So do you have any thoughts on how we can do this? We need to align these, like you say, for us to be able to move when you need us, we have to know what the plan is in advance.
Well, I'll tell you, here's my suggestion. I have worked with a group that has met essentially once every 3 weeks or so on the effort to reform our democracy, to take on issues like gerrymandering, voter suppression, dark money, to take on the paralysis on the floor of the minority, should that be the Mitch McConnell minority, being able to blockade any useful act that will help America, including climate. I think a similar structure of consultation between leaders of mass action, grassroots organizations, meeting on a basically once every work session, which is generally a 3-week period, with climate, dare I say, climate champions inside Congress, on a bicameral basis. So bring them over for the House and the Senate. Often the two sides aren't talking to each other. Bring those together with those who are advocating outside to coordinate ideas and strategy would be a very good way to help create that bridge between those two worlds and make ourselves as effective as possible.
Wonderful. Didn't know we'd have a specific answer, but it sounds like we have a very specific answer, and that's exciting. So we'll follow up with your office to see, what your leadership and guidance is on how we should bring that into fruition. And I'm just so excited that you want us to do that. And I think together we're going to save this planet. Let's do it. We have to do it. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time and everything you do. We really appreciate it. Oh, well, that was exciting. Anyone get a laundry list of project we have to work on yet? Did everyone write that down? We got it. All right, next up, we have, we're going to have Rania Batrice, from the Executive Director for March for Science, and also one of the leaders on the Off Fossil Fuels Act organizing. She's going to introduce Representative Raschida Tlaib. Thank you so much for joining us, Representative. We're just thrilled to have you. Please take it away, Rania.
Hello, thanks everybody for joining. I'm going to make this quick because I know we're all very, very excited to hear from the Congresswoman. She happens to be one of my very favorite members and humans on the planet. So I'm very excited to have her with us here today. And I sometimes tell the story, it's a personal story, but it's a good one, and kind of shows just how many lives she's moved. I am a first generation Palestinian, and I remember that many years ago, in a guy I was married to, who I'm now divorced from, I was thinking about running for office, and Rashida's heard this story. But he said, good luck getting elected to anything as a Palestinian woman. And it lit a bit of a fire under me, but then, you know, just can't stress enough how many of us out there just celebrated on so many levels when you got elected and reelected, and just following along all of the amazing work that you're doing and the way that you're leading in Congress, and really centering people and the planet and humanity. And I think we can all agree it's what we need more of. So without further ado, Congresswoman Raschida Tlaib.
Thank you so much, Rania. It's always good to see you. You look fantastic. Thank you to every single organization advocate for your incredibly important work. As you know, I feel very much like I'm part of a frontline community, the community that raised me. And so I come home every week, so I'm experiencing firsthand what doing nothing on climate crisis feels like, smells like, and looks like. So I really appreciate it. I know I was asked to talk about collectively what we can be doing together. And, you know, as you know, for me and many of my colleagues, the Green New Deal is an organizing tool. It's kind of our North Star for developing climate policy, starting with the statement of our principles and our goals, sets really clear guideposts for how legislation should be drafted to achieve those goals. We know the kind of revolutionary transformative change we need isn't something that the next Congress is going to vote on anytime soon. So we need those high level goals and principles to organize our communities around. And this is why, for me, this is why it's so important. And I hope you all believe in something that Grace Lee Boggs in Detroit taught many of us young activists. I'm not young as I was when she said these words, but it really resonated with me. But I truly believe that change does not start in the halls of Congress. It starts in dining rooms and community centers and union halls and church groups. We need to be building the movement for the ideals in the Green New Deal, for saving our planet, for future of our children with our neighbors outside of Washington. We need to be building an army of climate leaders who are organizing on a micro level. We're already seeing the result of that, and their organizing will return in results for our residents and people, again, that have experienced the painful decision by so many in power to do nothing about our climate crisis. I know climate change is remarkably intersectional, and we not only have to recognize that in our analysis, but more importantly, we have to use that to bring people into this movement. An African-American pastor told me once that our community was regarding another issue, but I believe it really applies here, that our communities are not divided, but we're disconnected. And there are so many ways that we connect people's everyday concerns to the Green New Deal. Even during this pandemic, I have seen how environmental racism has killed my neighbors. Pre-existing conditions due to polluted air and water has resulted in high number of my Black neighbors dying of COVID. The people in my district are begging for representatives to take their health and economic well-being seriously. I represent one of the poorest, most polluted districts in the country. What does the Green New Deal have to offer them? Well, I truly believe it starts talking about prioritizing pollution reduction in frontline communities like ours, to really try to talk about creating good union jobs, to build the green energy infrastructure we need we start to make that Green New Deal possible, the ideals in there, and save the planet for real this time. I am blessed to also be a mother in the United States Congress. And I tell you, it's a blessing because my 15-year-old son talks to me about climate more than my colleagues do. And I remember and tell you a story where I was in a room with Chairwoman Maxine Waters, and on Financial Services Committee, environmental justice issues are so critically important to me. So there was an opportunity to offer an amendment to completely stop investing in fossil fuel companies. And wonderfully, what she did is she brought my colleagues, Democratic colleagues that were opposed to the amendment, together to try to work out a resolution with myself and colleagues that were co-sponsors of that amendment. And my son, who at the time was 14 in the room, asks me for a blank piece of paper during the meeting. I give it to him. He hands it back to me. I still have it. I had no idea. I thought he was sketching. And he hands it back to me and he says, "Here, Mom, tell them this." And I said, "Okay." And of course, his whisper, everybody could hear. And after the meeting, I said, "Chairwoman, I have to read this." And he says, tell them by 2030, this is what's going to happen if we do nothing. And so I just sometimes feel like, especially on climate, if we can clear the room and put children in the room, I think we'd find a resolution quickly. But I know that I'm going to stay rooted in the community and listening to young people like my son and others. Those are the folks that we have to bring into this movement. And I know, just like the civil rights movement, just like the women's right to vote, just like the being able to organize and unionize in the workplace, it really didn't happen for who was in Congress or who was in the White House. It truly happened because we in the community in the streets demanded it. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate this opportunity.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much, Representative Tlaib. It's so grounding to hear you bring it back to the children. Obviously, I watch children on the subway in New York, and I'm like, I'm doing this for you, not having them myself. So one question we asked Senator Merkley, and this is where it becomes logistical, and this is where we're trying to get very strategic here. You know, our organization is grassroots, and all the people you're speaking to are the grassroots leaders on the ground across the country. These are the people that are ready to put their lives on the line in district to make things happen legislatively. But strategically, I'm looking for the lines of communication between Congress and then civil society writ large about what the internal strategy is and the game plan and the timing, because it takes, we got to sort of get everybody briefed on even the contingency plans. If they have to be contingency plan, that's fine. But establishing some sort of process that is in place so that we don't have to do it ad hoc every time. And Senator Merkley just mentioned a bicameral meeting space between the House and the Senate that would then have open conversation with civil society. So what are your thoughts about how we can get a structure in place for communication so that we can really start to leverage the outside power and bring them into the insider thinking and strategy, which seems to be a little bit, of a closed cage, in many respects. I'm trying to bring transparency to that so we can all be in this together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want you to know, we might get to the point where we get a structure. I can see it. I saw it during the Obama administration of attending tons of meetings, getting the EPA to have their conference right here in Detroit. I don't want the structure or these meetings to replace the activism and the grassroots work in the streets. It has to be both. And I ask you very kindly, anything that you all can do to stay aggressive and bold, even during this Biden-Harris administration, is critical. I saw what happened during the Obama administration, and no fault of anybody, but I remember organizing a protest and folks within the environmental justice community criticizing that, which was wrong on their part because residents came out. It wasn't protesting Obama, it was protesting the system. It was protesting the brokenness. And residents came out with necklaces made out of their asthma inhalers. Big signs that said, "If Marathon stinks, honk your horn." When the bus for the EPA administrator was coming by because they were giving her a tour of the frontline community, which was great, she stopped, got off the bus. Her nose hair started burning, just like what my residents been complaining. She started getting irritated. That led then later Marathon doing buyouts in the community and creating a green buffer. I just say this to you all because absolutely we're going to be able to create a structure. I think that's the bare minimum I think this administration will give us, is a structure to start these conversations. But they need cover, we need cover. We need that push back out in the streets and demanding to be bold and aggressive about this. We've already wasted so much time meeting. And I'll tell you this, please, all of you advocates are going to be offered to study more, to do reports. My residents have clearly told me and gave me a directive. We've been studied enough, Raschida. We've seen enough reports. We know it's killing us. Stop the permission to pollute and kill us. Stop it. So I truly believe as folks are coming together, absolutely brief them, get it together. But I want the noise outside to be so loud that it gives you all credibility at that table of whatever structure they present to us. So I hope I'm clear on that. I want to be part of more of the movement work on the streets and of course support those structures. But I think, one of the key things that was able to get us earned income tax credit, which was one of the most successful anti-poverty programs and everything, was because people didn't, they wanted something, they gave them that, which was very aggressive. It didn't include everybody in what we would consider in poverty. But I look at those movements and I think we should look at how they were able to progress. And even the fight for 15, 7 years, y'all, I got arrested twice. I got on the streets. One of the things that I can tell you is because local city government, local folks started passing resolutions. They started doing it before the federal government ever did. And finally, we were able to see a vote after 7 years. So I know that you want specific like next steps. I think going back to actually now, one of the things I said to my residents, look, I'm not telling you, look at this ballot and vote for names, vote for our values. But I also said, when you vote for Biden and Harris, and you're going to get a door we can knock down and tear down, or maybe ring the doorbell if we need to and be nice, a little more graceful. But right now there's a wall around the White House with the Trump administration, y'all. And you know it, you felt it. There was a wall that was pay to play, lawless, corrupt. And now we're going to have that door back. And I hope that we're using it very effectively. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. It's wonderful. And in session 6, we have the People's Climate Movement and Rise and Resist, Extinction Rebellion, the people who can do mass mobilization. But I'm a movement activist and I was involved in the immigration fight. We had comprehensive immigration reform and we had, huge marches in DC. We had mass arrests in New York City. We protested outside of Schumer's office and he was the lead sponsor of the bill to make it happen. He wasn't happy about that. So what I'm asking, I guess, is that we sort of need to know what the legislative demands are that are going to be in motion so we can get people excited. This is what we're going to be fighting for. And as I see it now, it's still a little bit of a closed loop. We don't know what the legislative agenda, I know we have some elections to have, that's true. But if there were a way for us to be briefed on the specific legislative goals in the next year, and then give us a little overview of the timeline, say, well, we want a mass mobilization in April, we want a mass mobilization in October. We just need a few goalposts and inspirational demands, and then we can organize mass action around that. So I just leave that there on the table for us to think about. But if you have any further thoughts on that now, that's great.
I think I will be more than willing to continue to have this dialogue and continue to let you all know when I see movement on certain issues. I do want to emphasize the most successes on environmental justice issues has been in the infrastructure bills. And so in the infrastructure bill, I was able to get 100 environmental justice groups supporting a carve out of $25 billion to replace all the lead contaminated pipelines across our nation. I got 8 Republicans to support me on that. So, and that's a bill that has to pass. So let's find those opportunities like they do. I can't believe what's in the Department of Defense bill, my God. But these are bills that seem to magically get bipartisan support. Let's start sticking our priorities in there and use those opportunities, because a lot of other special interest groups do that. I think that is a good approach. So I know these certain things have deadlines throughout the year. We know we have to pass infrastructure. We know we have to pass the defense bill and things of that nature, is to start using what I think Amo Bernie taught me is the power of the amendment. And I've been using it a lot. And even at the end, if I can't vote for it, I will let Leader Hoyer know, and he always appreciates it. But even when I come up with an amendment, he's like, well, I'm not giving it to you. I make sure it goes to a woman of color, though, that will get it in. But the point is to get the work done and move on and to get effective. But we've been able to do those kinds of successes. It's a huge, would be huge. It's one of the most aggressive lead abatement. And it's not, y'all, I don't know if you realize, in the previous years, it was partial replacement. Like any amount of lead is safe. This would be full replacement. It's huge.
Wonderful. Well, this is exciting. So I guess we're going in the right directions. We just maybe need a short little memo saying these are the specific places we're trying to put things in, and the pressure points, and where you would like some mass action mobilized. And then we can take that from there and try to stir up a real hornet's nest for you.
Thank you all again. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for being here and for your exciting leadership, and it's so nice to meet representatives who have the people at forefront, and your passion, your reason for being here. It gives me great hope that we're going to do great things together.
Well, they raised me this way, and this is how I am. I don't think I'm going to change. So
yay. The troublemakers unite. Troublemakers unite. Thank you so much for being here. Well, that was fun. Oh, let's see. Well, in terms of our timing, at 1 o'clock, we're supposed to have Representative Levin join us, but I'm not sure he's here with us yet. So I'm going to introduce Adam Zipkin, from the senior advisor to Cory Booker's office, who is just, from my early awareness of the last year or so, just always willing to get on the phone and share his thoughts and invite us into the conversation, invite the community. And I'm just very grateful for that. I think it's critical that we open these lines of communication, because it's going to take all of us. So Adam, if you have any thoughts, and if you want to give us your plan for the next few months, or whatever you want to tell us, we welcome you, and thank you so much for being here. We look forward to your input.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Todd, and for pulling this together. It's so important. And I thought that, everything that Senator Merkley and the Congresswoman just said were so perfect. And I'll focus on a few of the bills in the climate change space that Senator Booker has worked on that we think are important to just be included in the conversation, and we want to make sure are included in comprehensive legislation. And so, we know that we need to quickly transition from fossil fuels to clean energy and to electrify the transportation sector and so many other things, but just 3 areas that our office has specifically focused on. One, which we've already heard about, environmental justice, and just making sure that the comprehensive legislation that we come up with is centered around environmental justice and protecting low-income communities, communities of color, indigenous communities that historically have borne the brunt of pollution and the harm to their health and their lives from that, but also that we're already seeing are on the front lines of climate change and are being harmed the most from extreme weather events and what we're already seeing. And one bill that Senator Booker introduced recently focused on environmental justice is cleaning up legacy pollution. And so $100 billion to clean up Superfund sites and abandoned coal mines and former defense sites and other abandoned mines on tribal lands and other areas. And included in there, very aligned with what the Congressman was talking about, is also replacing lead service lines and remediating lead paint and making sure that all households have complete plumbing infrastructure, where you currently have households that are literally straight piping waste out into their backyard in 2020. And what we're seeing with climate change is this isn't just some tangential aspect that would be nice to address, but it's climate change adaptation, right? As we're seeing more storms and more flooding, we're seeing these Superfund sites flooding onto neighboring properties. And so it really needs to be something that is front and center with what we're trying to accomplish. Number 2, natural climate solutions. So investing at a really big scale in planting billions of trees, restoring millions of acres of coastal wetlands, and investing in farmers and ranchers to be part of the solution to climate change by investing billions of dollars through conservation programs so that they'll engage in practices that we know are really beneficial from a climate change perspective in terms of soil health and carbon sequestration. And I think at times, again, those natural climate solutions can just be not in the heart of the conversation, but they're so important because not only, so currently today in the United States, our trees and our wetlands and our soil absorbs 10 or 11% of all US emissions, but scientists have told us that there's the potential to absorb a lot more and just give us a buffer and more time as we're quickly trying to get to zero emissions, that we could be sequestering more and not having it go up into the atmosphere. And not only are we sequestering carbon, but there are so many co-benefits to that reforestation and wetlands restoration in terms of protecting communities from flooding and making communities more resilient and protecting drinking water. And so, Senator Booker has worked with Congresswoman Deb Haaland in the House on both that environmental justice cleanup legislation and these natural climate solutions. And then thirdly, just all of us need to focus on the role that our food system plays in as a major driver of climate change. So, we know the transportation sector and electricity, but in the US, roughly 10% of our emissions come from the food system, and globally it's more like 20-something%. And so finding solutions to transform our food system are also really important. Senator Booker has legislation that would phase out large factory farms over time, and we've worked a lot to build coalitions of support for these bills, working with rural stakeholders and farmers and ranchers, but also environmental groups and animal welfare groups. And I think that's the beautiful thing that you're doing here with this forum that you're pulling together, is by having stakeholders from so many different sectors participating in it, because the scale of the problem that we face and the sort of strength and economic power of the stakeholders that we're up against, the only chance that we have is if we're really, really united. And so I think the fact that I mentioned this on a previous call, Todd, the fact that you've really engaged the faith community, I think is so important to have their voice as part of this conversation, and sort of the moral authority that they bring and the amount of people that they reach that might not be reached by some of the other stakeholders, and just the recognition from all of us that we need to wake up every day, be putting everything that we have into this fight. And then we also need to be praying for, blessing on our work. And so it's just so important to have them as part of our coalition. And I think that the grassroots, everyone, that's participating in this and watching it has already accomplished so much, right? Like, we have so much still to do, and we're so late, and it can seem really bleak at times, or just the undertaking, the scope of it is so massive, but there really has been so much accomplished already, just in terms of the grassroots having taken climate change from number 17 on, the public's list of priorities, and now it's up to, a top 2 or 3 issue for a lot of people in the United States, which then drives the politics and drives members of Congress to put it up on their list of priorities. And so I think that, we will see what happens in Georgia, and we'll see exactly what the Senate is, if the Republicans are in charge, or if it's 50-50, or what exactly it is. I think that a lot of us had hoped for, while we're super excited about the Biden administration coming in, we had hoped for maybe a different result in the Senate, where the big climate change bill that we're here talking about today still could have been more imminent, and could have been something that we would be talking about, like, can we bring it to the floor in the next few months? And now we have to just sort of recommit ourselves that this, however many years we're going to have to keep fighting these fights, we'll keep fighting these fights together. And the role that you all have played is the role I think you need to keep playing, which is continue to mobilize public opinion and public support. And as I think the senator and the congresswoman said, just pushing the members of Congress. Like at the end of the day, if it's a 50-50 Senate or a Republican controlled Senate, like on the inside, we're going to have to cut deals. Like we're going to ultimately have to deal with the art of the possible and make as much progress as we can over the next 4 years. And I'm hopeful that we can make a lot of progress no matter what the landscape, but you know, having your voice, sort of the outside game and the inside game, where you all are just not cutting deals and lowering the ask that you have, but continuing to just push the ideal and push for what we know is what we ultimately need to achieve. And we have to just accomplish as much of it as we can in 2021 and 2022 and 2023, and just keep doing it together until we're successful.
Adam, thank you so much. You're going to stay with us, so we're going to go into this much more. It looks like you're a little frozen. So we're going to go into this a little bit more after Congressman Levin shares his thoughts with us. And so you'll stay for the panel and we'll dig into what you're talking about. It's very exciting what you're saying, of course. Next, we're going to invite Congressman Andy Levin to the conversation. It's an honor to meet you. I had a conversation with your team and they told me when I was going on my soapbox about building climate, comprehensive bills and uniting everybody. And he said, "Oh, I feel like I'm talking to the congressman. Do you know him?" And so evidently we're simpatico and we don't realize it. But it's wonderful to have you. I hear you are a union organizer. So our conversation today is focused on strategy. We've heard a lot of policy ideas. We know that we have a lot of policy fights to fight. The question is, how are we going to come together, Congress and civil society, both united and then obviously independently, but on the same game plan to the extent possible. So we welcome your thoughts on anything you'd like to share and on that if you have them. And we welcome you and thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks, Todd. It's just great to be with you and with everybody who's participating in this super important discussion. So, the way I look at this, I've been an organizer for sort of a deep ecology approach to the world and to our one precious planet since I was an anti-nuclear organizer in college. And I feel like we've known since the 80s about what we needed to do, and we've done, practically speaking, virtually nothing, decade after decade. And now the disaster of us overheating our planet is smacking us in the face in so many ways. So what to do? Let me start with where you did in terms of my experience. I spent more time in the labor movement than anywhere else at SEIU, at the UAW, and especially at the AFL-CIO. And when I'm an original co-sponsor of the Green New Deal, but way back when I was talking to the folks who were, organizing that about it, I said, okay, frontline communities, check. Most vulnerable populations, check. We've got to add most affected workers, most affected workers, most affected workers. And there's simply no way strategically to build the coalition to get this done. There's no way to do it without giving the fossil fuel workers, the Boilermakers, the utility workers, the pipe fitters, the laborers who work on pipelines, a seat absolutely at the center of the table and say to them, basically, your work is incredibly valuable, your skills, we see you, we want to work with you, and we basically have to hold them completely harmless. And I'm talking wages, benefits, retirement, healthcare, and just all opportunity to help shape the jobs of the future in a clean energy economy, including, of course, all the training opportunities. And the Green New Deal really incorporated that, and I'm very proud of it. I think that what we need to do, this is what there's the idea of one big bill. But when we introduced the Green New Deal, my reaction was, okay, now let's talk about all the meat on the bones, or if you're a vegetarian, some other way of looking at it. So what I've been doing, Todd, is thinking about and introducing pieces of legislation. And I think we have to, climate change requires the fastest and most comprehensive legislative response on anything that we've ever seen. Maybe World War II is an analogy in terms of a national mobilization. I don't even know. But so I'm into thinking about how are we going to do this in every area, agriculture, land use, manufacturing, and so forth. And I'm not an expert in everything. So what I've been doing is thinking about how can I lead on the things that I know about or that, you know, are particularly relevant to my district. So for example, I introduced the EV Freedom Act. And very purposefully, I introduced it with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC, was my lead co-sponsor, but it's right in there in the recommendations of the Speaker's Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. We've got to do things that span the spectrum. And the bills we introduced, the EV Freedom Act, is emblematic because in every area, we have to really accomplish four things. The first thing is we have to be bold and we have to tap into American innovation and creativity. That is a unifying, even patriotic idea that this is about the future. It's about America leading in the economy of the future. The second thing, it has to be comprehensive in every area. The third thing is we have to move very fast. And the fourth thing is we have to focus on frontline and vulnerable communities and the most affected workers. Those are my four criteria for everything. And so in terms of the EV Freedom Act, right, it says we are going to, within just a few years, establish a comprehensive national network of high-speed charging infrastructure in the entire national highway system, not just the interstates, Todd, but the smaller highways too. And this is going to create a tremendous number of jobs. And yes, union jobs. I'm talking about IBEW members building the charging stations. I'm talking about utility workers that work for the utilities. If you put 20 or 30 high-speed chargers in one place, you need a whole new substation for that. So there's a lot of great jobs here. It's got the speed, and I'm pretty psyched, to be honest with you, that Joe Biden has been on this one thing. He's been pretty much speaking this exact language. So we need to do that in area after area. I will shortly introduce a pair of ESG investment bills, where that stands for environment, social, and governance structures. It's basically sustainability and investment. So workers in their pensions, in their 401ks, can have their values. They can invest their values. And you know what? It's the best for long-term investment value because, we know what the future is, right? And ESG investments, investments that include looking at climate change, for example, are outperforming the general market. So it's good as a fiduciary and it's good for our values. I will soon introduce with Senator Warren a Green Build Act, very large bill, or, the BUILD program is these grants that we give. So we're going to build green. It's going to be all about electrification of mass transit, high-speed rail, school bus fleets, city car fleets, charging stations, everything in that electrification area. And then early next year, I'll introduce a bill about the entire built environment. All new buildings need to be zero net energy or better, ZNE or better by when, right? Standards for retrofitting buildings, existing building stock, by when and by how much. And so I think that we can really, what you're doing today is so important. Because if I understand it, Todd, which maybe I don't, but I think what you're doing is saying, look, you in Congress, we are going to give you your marching orders in terms of the kind of this idea of standing up the strongest policy in area after area, and that it has to be, we have to move very quickly. And as Adam was saying, Congress doesn't move, no administration moves without serious, highly organized, energized, creative, and excited pressure from civil society. I've been reading to get myself inspired about this coming time about some of what happened in the 30s. And, people think of FDR as the most progressive president. Well, a lot of what happened in the New Deal came from pressure from civil society to make things better. That's in area after area, Todd. So this is an incredibly historic moment when the people, y'all may just think you're at a, whatever this is, a conference or a convening or yet another Zoom experience. But to me, what you're doing is so important and it's necessary. It's literally the fuel that I need to move into the 117th Congress with big momentum to act comprehensively and quickly to save this one precious planet we have. So that's where I'm coming from, Todd. And I don't, I appreciate you, and I really appreciate you inviting me to participate.
Well, this is wonderful. Every time I'm hearing now, I'm just getting more and more excited. So I have to calm down because then I get too excited and I sound crazy. This is all wonderful. So as you know, this is multiplicity of legislation, right? So it's this arena is more complex than any other, and there are all these bills and all these, so we're creating. We'll be talking about creating a comprehensive bill in civil society that has all the pieces. And again, it's setting that gold standard so we give the activists something to fight for with all their passion, which will change what's politically possible inside. But we won't have that bill, even if we all agree to go down that path, for 6 months, maybe a year. In the interim, we want to be ready to fight on the ground. So we put together a climate bill package of about 10 bills that were filed, Senator Booker's bills and fracking and plastics and several bills. And there are a few more in the pipeline. One to protect forests internationally by banning imports into the United States. One to ban lending institutions from financing fossil fuel infrastructure. That would be an interesting maneuver. So we have all these individual bills, and I'm an organizer, right? So I'm thinking, how can we organize the legislative agenda of Congress and get these in some sort of package? So, because then we've had people adopting their congressional district already, all over already, and they are lobbying for the package of bills. So we can expand that package in the short term and then work collectively. But this is the organizing challenge. How do we collect all these bills that everyone's filing bills? How do we bring some order to that and then package them a little bit, get all the sponsors to agree, yes, we're going to support each other's bills, and then we can get civil society to support them as a package. And that starts to have a little bit of structure that gives us a focal point for our demands and our organizing right now. And all these individual pieces could be big wins in many ways. So I don't know if you have thoughts now on that, or we can always talk later. But hear what I'm saying? How do we organize the congressional?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and let me just say that Joan put a question in about the EV Freedom Act. And yes, Joan, there are provisions to make sure that we use renewable energy to power EV charging. So that's a great question. I just saw that in your Q&A, Todd. So I would respectfully suggest that, I think one of the things that separates good organizing from all, the efforts that are more successful from less is sort of elegant simplicity. And so I think, like I mentioned, 4 criteria, right? And I'm not saying they're the right ones, but I think that if you organize your effort around a set of criteria and your group says, what do these bills have in common? How are we deciding what makes it and what doesn't? And if you drive those, I think that you could have a possibility of having that more widely adopted, and people saying, okay, well, I got to meet this standard. I want these groups to support my bill, or, we want to put pressure on. It's not that different than with an app. Why does one app take off and another one doesn't? It's because the interface is so user-friendly. It's so intuitive. It's so obvious. And so there's a lot of anxiety about climate change. There's a lot of interest bouncing around of people, different industries, different groups that care about water, they care about land, they care about forests, they care about, crops. And there's so many aspects of it. I think if you say, look, this is our framework, in which all of these bills make sense, or this one big comprehensive thing we're moving towards, I think that could really have a lot of power, both to make this effort more powerful, but also in this organizing period, it sort of gets everybody, it creates a lingua franca to, have everybody have one set of criteria to know what you'll move and what you won't. You may already be doing that, but that's
That's
thought.
an interesting idea, because we're talking to MIT and Project Drawdown, and we would love for them to put together a scientific advisory committee that would assess the projected greenhouse gas reduction impacts from proposed legislation. And that would give us a common frame of understanding. And that does not to the exclusion of EJ and J tree overlays at all, to the contrary, but to have one scientific basis to look at so we're working on that, and that would be used, for bills and for a comprehensive package. But the challenge we face is, there's a lot of principles, there are a lot of organizing philosophies. We're about legislation and lobbying, because we want the details in writing, and we want to teach it to the activists who are in this community. I couldn't believe it. This is a very sophisticated audience, activist. I'm new to this movement in the last few years. I was in the LGBT movement and worked on immigration. I've never seen such capacity and sophistication, but they're tired of talking about concepts and abstract goals. We need specifics to fight for, and to go to that legislative office and sit there until we get it. So that's where it's a little bit tricky. We would love simplicity, but that's very hard in this arena, multifaceted arena. So somehow or another, it would be helpful if Congress could get together among the real champion leaders and collect your bills and share and say, do that part of the job for us and give us, that list. And then we can go through the journey ourselves, reviewing it and making sure everybody loves it and getting ready to fight. But we just need a little bit more of organizational interface, I think.
Well, sign me up. We're happy to collaborate with you on that. I think what you'll find is that there are, those of us who are deeply involved in the Green New Deal, the most progressive among us, are, trying to collaborate around a set of bills. And then, of course, you have the much bigger thing, which I think is very important, of, the huge recommendations of the Select Committee on the climate crisis, which, if you could wave a magic wand and have all that implemented, it would be, go way beyond Paris and, really get into serious reductions in many ways. So anyway, I'm very happy to work with you. And I guess one of the things that my suggestions is, a member like me comes on and talks to you all. If you really want to get stuff done, get to know our staff. Really, they are so committed. The progressive offices. Courtney Laudick on my staff. She's deep in a network of the staff people who are really working on this. And so I think if you want to really get into legislative detail and collaboration, you want to build those relationships in the individual offices, both House and Senate, and on committee staff, the key committee staff. But it's probably the individual offices that'll be the driver of it.
We're happy to do that, of course, always. And that's the way it's done generally. But I feel like in this context, the challenge is so big. But we'll definitely do that, of course, and reach out. And I'm just sort of still hoping. The part of it is that the information flow sort of stops sometimes in the major organizations or in the inside circle, and it doesn't make its way through to the public. There's not a transparency and a public-facing campaign with immigration reform, the Equality Act, the Breathe Act, all these other bills. We know, and there's a public-facing campaign. So maybe that's part of it. We just need to have Congress come and brief like this, but on a more specific, here's the legislative strategy for the next 3 months, and so we just need to figure out how Congress can, share their game plan, and hopefully that be a little bit more collective across sectors. And that would give us marching orders that we could then organize around. It's just one of these catch-22s. It's like, where do we begin to get the clarity that we need to mass organize with?
Yeah, well, and then you have the added complexity of now we have a Democratic administration coming in that aims to be, by far the most aggressive climate change administration that we've ever had. It has to be. Thank God. But I mean, we must move right now and way more aggressively. So of course that team is still being filled out, the administration, but we're going to all need to act together here. And
Exactly.
so,
That's
but
what
I wouldn't, I'm very hopeful. I think one of the things you need to realize is that if you look at my freshman class and the next, then the incoming class for the 117th Congress, I mean, like I spent the 8 years before I came to Congress, not in my whole union organizing career, not in my whole work, I used to run the workforce system of the state of Michigan, and I ran a state department, and I have a whole human rights history. But what I did for the 8 years, I created and ran a clean energy finance market in Michigan. And, it's called Lean and Green Michigan, and it's still there. I'm not involved anymore, but it's still there going gangbusters. And there are others who are either deep coming out of the environmental justice movement or the kind of clean energy movement, more like I was, or markets, So I just think that there is tremendous energy here. The enthusiasm for this is really high.
Oh,
and
yeah.
So, all the challenges of, the leadership and 435 members and, the Republicans and Democrats and the committees, all the complexity of Congress is here. But the troops on the ground are gathering force and are increasing in number who want to drive, radical change.
Yeah.
To save our planet.
Yeah,
So we're
and
going
that's
to
what
do
we're
it.
working on. And that's why this is all about a strategy conversation precisely on that arena. And I'm a activist and organizer. So I need to know what the demand is and what the plan is. And once we know the demand and the plan, then it's no holds bar, and we'll bring everything. So we'll continue this. Obviously, it's just the beginning of this year. We have so much potential and hope, obviously, and there are going to be obstacles always, and we're going to find ways to barrel through those obstacles. And so that's what this conversation is for. We do need to get into the nitty-gritty of what specific legislative bills you all want to push in these political contexts as it exists. And that will give us a lot of valuable fuel we'll know when to show up, when to do a mass mobilization, whose offices to target, those kinds of things.
Well, let me just say, I don't know how strongly to put this. The history of movements and legislation is not coming to Congress people and saying, what do you want? It's deciding what's needed and coming to Congress and demanding it.
Well, yeah, we're going to do
that's
that.
what you all need to do.
We're definitely going to do that.
I'll just give you an example, because I was so into this, this famous CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. When that was conceived, I forget the exact language, but they were going to pay people $1 a day or anyway, something that in 1930, whatever, was not very much money. And the labor movement of the time was against it. And they demanded something different. It was fixed in the Senate, what we think of as Roosevelt's plan, and it was passed, but it was improved because of demands of the outside movement. And then FDR put the president of the Machinists Union in charge of creating and running the CCC after it was passed. So the outside movement demanded the program, demanded that it be improved. And then in that kind of great collaboration, the president said, okay, he picked someone from that movement to actually breathe life into it. That's the moment we have to be at where, I happen to be, I didn't come here till I was 58, Todd. I've spent my whole life as a union organizer and a human rights activist and so forth. But now I am here, and so I'm organizing on the inside, but I just can't encourage you enough to realize how much power you can build as you just do exactly what you're saying. Decide on what you want, get it crisp, get it sharp, get it well organized, and then, knock on our door and say, this is what we need. And of course, it's a choreographed thing to some extent, because some of us inside would be like, oh, come on in, you know,
Yeah.
and oh, what an interesting proposal, because we've been talking about it. So I'm
Wonderful.
really enthusiastic about what you're doing. Sign me up. And I know, you know, a lot of my colleagues will want to participate too.
Well, you've just given us a green light for what our big goal is to draft that comprehensive, scientifically based bill together in community and set the goalposts where they need to be, and then unleash the power of millions of activists and groups behind it. And we will change what's possible on the inside, and you will have all the power you need to put whatever you want through. So we're all on the same page, it sounds like, and I'm so excited about it. Thank you so much for your time and being here. If there's anything last words you'd like to say, you're welcome to, or we can conclude as, and just thank you so much.
No, I just wish everybody happy holidays. I mean, this probably goes without saying, but I just, you know, the environmental movement has not been a successful movement in terms of environmental justice and of, you know, dealing with America's original sins. And I see a lot of hopeful change on that. But I'm sure what you're doing will be really focused on moving forward in a way that truly, I mean, this is an amazing opportunity to really correct a lot of what we've done wrong in the past and create fantastic leadership opportunities, job opportunities, cleaning up the environment for the most people who've been excluded, people who've been, you know, had the hardest time, whose neighborhoods have been the most polluted and all that. So, I mean, but, you know, when you talk about strategy and you talk about politics, just like I said with the most affected workers, unless, you know, we got to get labor in there and we've got to make it be a transformative justice movement for the communities of color and the poor communities of this country. And then there's no stopping us, you know?
I think that's wonderful. And I think it's baked into the cake now. I'm new, like I said, but from what I can tell, it's baked into cake. So I don't think we're gonna have any problems with that. And everyone's feeling that mojo and that passion from that justice perspective. And that's really what's gonna carry us to victory.
Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you so much.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, all right, Rania, you take over. I'm done. So everyone, we've obviously filled out a little more time in that conversation than we had scheduled, but we're still at 1:30, so we're okay. And if it's all right with everyone, we'll bring Michelle and Demond into the conversation and let you share your opening thoughts and reflections on everything. And then we'll just see and Rania, you haven't had a chance, obviously, to say, you know, more substantively. Maybe you would like to kick us off, and you could maybe touch on the Off Fossil Fuels Act a little bit. And then we'll go to Michelle and Demond, and then we'll see what closing thoughts people have.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. Again, thanks for having me. And I have so many thoughts on so many things, so I'm going to try to keep it as concise as possible because there's a lot of amazing folks that still need to share their thoughts. But so I'm the interim executive director of March for Science, and March for Science is a global organization with a domestic focus as well, of course. And so I'm not a scientist. I always feel like I have to tell on myself. I'm fascinated by science. I have two brothers who are scientists, and I've always been endlessly jealous that their brains function that way. But I think the reason I'm here, and honestly, one of the big reasons March for Science exists is to help show people like me and all of us that we all have a place and a space in this movement. And you heard, you know, Raschida talked about it. You heard Andy talk about it as well, that we have to push. Change happens from the outside in more often than not. I sometimes joke, and it gets me in trouble, but I'm going to say it anyway. Rarely does a member of Congress wake up in the morning and just do the right thing. I'm not saying it never happens. There are absolutely exceptions, but public opinion and that great force that we all bring forward together, so often, we've seen it throughout history, we've seen it across movements, is really what pushes the ball up the field. Sorry for the sports analogy. I was an athlete in my past life, but really, that's, you know, that's what we've seen over and over and over again. And Raschida talked about young people, which I have such a hard time sometimes talking about young people because they inspire me and make me hopeful. But I also think we have to stop telling them that they make us hopeful, because they already are under so much stress and so much pressure. And oftentimes I think we've seen folks who say, oh, the young people, and then it's like, they've got this and I'm going to just go sit back here. No, it's going to take all of us, and we have to be present alongside those amazing, inspiring, hope-filling young people. And anyway, so that is, it is hugely important. I think it's sometimes, I have suffered with imposter syndrome for a vast majority of my life. I'm trying to tackle it, but I do think, you know, March for Science and many other organizations out there are really helping folks like me to realize we all do have a place in this movement. And one of my dear friends always says, she gets asked a lot, as I'm sure a lot of us do, what should I do? What do I do? And her answer is so profound, but so simple. Do what you're good at. We need storytellers. We need artists. We need educators. We need activists. We need advocates. And of course, we need scientists and researchers. All of us together are what are going to move this movement forward and save our planet and humanity, as it were. And Todd mentioned the OFF Act, the Off Fossil Fuels Act, which I was very gratefully part of helping to write it and organize folks around it. And one of the most beautiful things, it was an uphill battle for sure, because we were talking about getting off fossil fuels and environmental justice, and our benchmark was 2035. So you heard the senator talking about how 2050 sounded so outlandish. Well, it was. I mean, it missed the mark because science and research told us that 2050 was too late. So it was a huge uphill battle for a number of reasons that maybe we'll all go have drinks one day and we'll talk about. But one of the most beautiful, amazing, wonderful things about that process was we worked with well over 400 organizations to create that piece of legislation. And at the time, it was the most progressive and aggressive piece of legislation in Congress. And it wasn't, I love all of the big organizations out there. I work with a lot of them on a regular basis, but we also brought in some of those smaller organizations that oftentimes don't get brought to the table because they are smaller. They don't have the huge budget, they don't have the big name, and they are often in the trenches doing the work, but don't necessarily have the spotlight that some do. And it really was my sort of mission in life, I guess, for a very long time, has been to bring the politics, the policy, and the advocacy all together. Because we've seen time and time and time again where folks are really having a conversation. It's like think tanks and all of those types of folks who are creating legislation, but never having conversation with the people who are actually affected. And so that is a personal goal of mine. It's something that's a mission of March for Science as well, is to bring folks together. So I am here for that every single day of the week, and I'm going to stop talking now because I heard the little bell in my ear.
That was wonderful. That was perfect. And you were just like right on time. 5 minutes is our allotted slot for these moments. We're going to try to stay on there. There'll be a little tingly bell, but no worries. And just the OFF Act was the catalyst. We brought the OFF Act to action in New York City, and we brought 350 NYC. Food and Water Watch was one of the lead organizations behind it, and Sunrise and DSA, and they got all excited about federal legislation, which no one was talking about in 2018. And after we all worked together to rally the co-sponsors for that bill, Sunrise went to Nancy Pelosi's office, and AOC, who had endorsed the OFF Act and the No Fossil Fuel Monies Pledge in her campaign, showed up at that office, and the rest, as you know, is history. So you just never know when you put things in motion, what it will inspire and what can flow from it. And that's what we hope, that many unforeseeable things will come from this symposium. I forget who I said would go next. Michelle, would you like to go next? And I'm so glad you could make it with us today and that you're feeling well enough to be here. Thank you. And for all your work and help in pulling this together and inviting all the elected officials. Michelle Dietrich is the chair of the DNC Climate Council on the Environment and Climate Crisis. So welcome, Michelle, and thank you again. Please, we're happy to have you and hear your remarks.
Thank you so much, Todd. It's an absolute honor to be here. Listening to some of the greatest climate champions in Congress, Senator Merkley, Congressman Levin, Congresswoman Tlaib, and now to be speaking with these really amazing organizers whose work I so much admire, Rania and Demond and Susan. And thank you, Todd, and Climate Crisis Policy for bringing us together. This is such an important event. And it couldn't be happening at a more important moment. We literally do not have another moment to waste. The latest science shows that climate change is accelerating at a pace that's faster than was thought even a year ago, that the old models didn't adequately capture what's actually happening. So let's be clear, Joe Biden ran as a climate candidate, and we're going to work every day to ensure that he can govern as a climate president. And as we've already seen, and as we know, he has lots of allies in Congress. For the most part, the Democrats from coast to coast understand the threat and the need to act urgently. And we have legislators, as we've heard, who are poised to propose even more crucial legislation than we already have, like Congressman Levin's infrastructure bill, which is really important. But we can't fool ourselves as we talk about how to organize going forward. You know, what they're going to face in Congress is universal obstruction from Republicans, which is where all of us come into the picture. The way I think about this is that the legislative strategy is the political strategy. So I chair the DNC Environment and Climate Crisis Council, which we founded just over a year ago to advocate inside the party and outside for bold climate policy, for environmental justice, and for a clean energy economy with millions of good union jobs. So we need to build up. When politics, what you legislate is what you prioritize. We certainly saw that in 2008. So we need to put climate and environmental justice first more than ever and build up our legislators on climate. And thank and amplify those who are leading the way, like the legislators we heard from today, who are doing brave and bold work. And then we need to follow through, celebrating the impacts of what they managed to get accomplished. We need to have their backs. We need to drum up public demand for bold action. So we can and should talk about running campaigns like Mike Levin and others have done based on climate issues. Because when you stand up for good new green union jobs and for fighting climate change and for environmental justice, you have the confidence that the majority of Americans are going to be behind you, including a lot of independents and Republicans. So for those of us who are inside the party, working within the Democratic Party, it's our prerogative and our mandate to work closely with people like the Congresspeople who've been here today and with their staff, as Congressman Levin mentioned, and ask them and help them put pressure on their colleagues to run more candidates who run on climate policy. And doing this effectively is about organizing and about coalition building. The council is focusing on building that connective tissue among the DNC, Dem Party leadership, legislators, and other elected leaders focusing on this incredible work. Like, we shouldn't forget our attorneys general, local officials, governors. So a way that this happened really effectively for the council was when we worked on the Democratic Party platform this summer. We built a coalition of 180 plus environmental groups, and we're able to get 13 crucial changes to the Democratic Party, focusing mostly around climate and environmental justice. So organizing in the middle of a global pandemic, as many of the people on this panel know very well, is not easy. We need to do it, make our voices heard. Washington's crawling with lobbyists and special interest groups who have a financial interest in ensuring the status quo. So we need to make the phone calls and write the letters, lobby our members of Congress and hold those who fail to act accountable and do the work. So we need the outside game to work with the inside game. And the Common Council has some specific ideas around doing that maybe we can talk about later. But Representatives Tlaib and Levin and Senator Merkley and others can't do it without us, and we can't do it without them. And that's why this symposium is so crucial. It's the fight for all of us, and looking forward to getting to work with the Biden-Harris administration. Thank you, Todd.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. It's just so exciting. I've been dealing with party politics as a gay man for a long time, and we never had a friend. We had several individual friends, but we didn't have the parties as a friend necessarily for a long time. So like the Equality Act just passed the House in 2019 after we've been fighting it since the 70s. And just meeting you and hearing you and feel that they created this role in there, and that you're doing this pivotal linkage between the inside and the outside gives me a new level of hope that there's an acknowledgement that we do have to work all together, and we're in this all together. And and just your forthcomingness with everything and your willingness to jump in has just been great. So we're excited. All right, well, we'll continue this. We don't have to cut off right at 2, so we'll see. Damon, would you like to go next? And then we'll have Reverend Susan Hendershot close us out. Go ahead, Damon. Damon's with the New Consensus. You may have heard of it. It's been in the middle of the hoopla, the beautiful hoopla that brought us the Green New Deal. And so he's had a real insider's bird's eye view of this. And as I understand in talking with him, he wasn't, a regular feature in this world yet. So he got to come in new, sort of like me. And so I'm eager. I know you have a Federal Reserve strategy that you want to share with us, but I'm also eager to hear your real insider think tank perspective on what this organizing morass looks like and how we can shape it into a force that can be reckoned with.
For sure. So no, thank you, Todd, for pulling us together at this most critical time in the life of our republic and in the history of humanity itself. And thank you for the invitation to join this forum. Rania, Michelle, Susan, it's an honor and a privilege to be in your time slot. So happy to be here. Rania said something that I think was quite profound. I think you're in the right place when you're hearing people kind of bring things out of you that you were kind of thinking about, but not really saying out loud. She said, do what you're good at, do what you're passionate about. We all have a role to play in moving the ball forward. And it reminded me of one of my favorite quotes from the Christian mystic, Howard Thurman, who was a mentor, spiritual mentor to Martin Luther King. He said, do not ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive, and then go do that. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. And that's just been a driving kind of whisper in my ear this entire time. And it's been quite interesting to come into the climate conversation from the position of, the goal of building a just and equitable, prosperous and sustainable economy. And so when we talk about what it takes to achieve our climate goals, what it takes to hit our emissions reductions targets and repairing the harm done to people and ecosystems, restoring a proper relationship with our natural environment. When we talk about these things, the Green New Deal is the massive mobilization of the whole of society to create a more just, a more sustainable, more prosperous economy and society. One of the first questions we get is, how do you pay for it, right? And I like to answer that big question and connect it to this question of legislative strategy by telling a very old story, very briefly, right? So, and this wasn't my original intent, so I'm just kind of riffing off of what Rania and Todd are kind of throwing at me here. When Todd mentioned at the top of this forum that the love of money is destroying our planet, right? It reminded me of a scripture that I grew up with in the Church of God in Christ. I was a kid and I learned that the love of money is the root of all evil, right? And there's this story in the Bible, if I may, just briefly, just to use this story, and not to jump in Susan's lane, but there's this story that I think really helps shape and helps us answer the question of how do we pay for all these changes. You might be familiar with the story of 2 fish and 5 loaves. It basically goes like this. So Jesus, he's a teacher, he's a healer. He was doing his thing. He was away from the town. He was standing in a field adjacent to a lake. And of course, wherever Jesus was, a crowd would form. And then he had 5,000 families around him. And then, lunchtime is approaching. And he turns to his disciples and says, we need to find a way to feed these people. I need you to feed these people because they're getting hungry. And the disciples turn to him and say, well, how are you going to pay for it? We don't have enough money to feed 5,000 families worth of a crowd. Like, that's ridiculous. We have no money to feed all these people. And he tells them again, I'm not talking about money. I told you to feed the people. And you know how the story ends. A boy comes up, he has 2 fish, 5 loaves. Jesus lifts it up to heaven, prays over it, and all of a sudden there's food for everybody. Now, this could be a story about a miracle. That's fine. But I think there's a deeper message here that helps us understand how to pay for the big changes that we need to see in our society. I think the story here, or one of the lessons from this story, is that Jesus was standing in a field on the soil where you could grow crops and wheat that makes bread. He was standing next to a lake where the fish came from. And the disciples were talking about money, which was Caesar's currency. But Jesus knew the currency was not the economy. The currency is just a tool created by humans to mobilize the resources of our natural environment. And so when it comes to paying for all of these things that we need to see done, whether it be replacing all the pipes across the country, making our homes and buildings more energy efficient, getting distributed solar across the country, and making the investments to repair the harm of environmental damage to communities across the country, I think it's often very easy to focus on what can be appropriated or regulated through legislation. But I think it's important to remember that Congress has a role in oversight of the Federal Reserve System, and the Federal Reserve System sets the monetary policy of our country, basically the production of money. And so in 2020, we saw a lot of interesting things happening with the Federal Reserve, right? They printed, I want to say unlimited quantities, but trillions of dollars of new money to save Wall Street. And we see the stock prices reflecting that new money, inflating stock prices on Wall Street. We saw the Federal Reserve lending for the first time ever, not just to banks, but making loans for businesses. That program is very flawed, but we see the Fed lending to businesses. What this tells us is that what Joseph Stiglitz told us over dinner back in early 2019 is actually true. Our Federal Reserve System can do whatever it takes and can do whatever it wants to help us solve problems in our society. And so the price tag of these changes is actually, and how do we pay for it, is not actually a question. The question is, how do we set our monetary policy to create new money, to fund investments, and set the regulatory capacity to mobilize and redirect existing capital to the things that we want. So moving away from fossil fuels to renewables, and for cities and states and localities that want to upgrade pipes and energy efficient buildings, the Federal Reserve, our monetary policy, our monetary capacity has the means to mobilize currency, to mobilize capacities in our society to get these things done. So I think it would be a mistake to focus only on what can be regulated or appropriated when we have a Congress, the House and the Senate, that has oversight over the Federal Reserve System, and can, at the very least, through hearings and at best through legislation, mandate that the Fed not just, work with banks and save banks and small businesses, but really make sure that those types of investments, those types of loans, that type of liquidity being added to the economy be done within a climate strategy. And so I think that's an area that we could really explore. And also, I think for the movement side, and I'll end here, it means that there could be a scenario if Georgia doesn't go our way, that we accept that little can be done. But even without the Senate, right, the House through oversight can hammer questions, right, to the chair of the Fed, right, and demand answers on what are you doing about this problem? How are you adding liquidity to the new green industries that we want to see? How are you adding liquidity to help farmers transition, right, to regenerative agriculture? How are you adding liquidity to solve the problems that we need to solve? And then pushing on the administration to also use that bully pulpit to really set an environment for the Fed to live up to its mandate, which is to be America's development bank. It has the capacity to literally create money for all the things that we want to see done. And if you're thinking about inflation being a concern, unless you believe that our economy is already overheated, right, and that people already make too much money, and our economy is just sizzling. I mean, it's just doing well. We're at 100% capacity already. Inflation is not a concern. We've been struggling to hit 2% for the last decade, right? So it's not going to break the economy. We have the means to do everything that we need to do. And that's the good news. We can do it with Congress. We can also do it without Congress. So that's the shorthand. And I think there is a such scenario for us to accept that little can be done. We've got to keep pushing.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. I love it. From Jesus to the Federal Reserve. Those linkages don't get made every moment. And we live in a world of abundance, basically. And so this is not a question of scarcity. This is a question of organizing and coming together. And that's really so we're going to circle back to you, even though we're getting close to time. I'm going to invite Reverend Susan Hendershot first to speak. And then I want to come back to you and I want to ask you, Damon, to tell us your inside magic wizardry of how we're going to unite all these warring factions and you make sure the Working Families Party and the Democratic Party and all the big ones and the small ones, how are we all going to get on the same wavelength? So hold that thought. And next up, we have Susan Hendershot, president of Interfaith Power and Light. Interfaith Power and Light is a huge network. And, I'm waiting for the saints to come marching in to save us. And I think Susan is going to be at the front of that line. So Susan, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Todd, and thank you, everyone. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be with all of you, my fellow panelists, and Damon, that was fantastic use of scripture references as well. Really appreciate that. So as you heard, I'm Reverend Susan Hendershot. I serve as the president of Interfaith Power and Light, and we are an NGO that was founded 20 years ago as a religious response to global warming. And our mission is to inspire and mobilize people of faith and conscience to take bold and just action on climate change. And I have so appreciated all of the justice references and the intersectionality that has been part of the conversation so far in these 2 hours. And I just want to share briefly that the three pillars of our work are working for policy change, galvanizing action through public engagement with people of faith throughout the country, and changing the narrative around climate change while being deeply committed to our principles of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we think that these are, especially important approaches when we are talking about a wicked problem like climate change. We have to really take a systems approach to that. One of the things that I wanted to share with everyone today is that we commissioned a poll with Climate Nexus and other partners just this October before the elections. And we learned or affirmed several things about religious voters when it comes to action on climate change. One of those was that religious voters care about climate change and want to see the president and Congress in 2021 take action on climate change. And I think it's really important to say that out loud. And across the faith community, with all of the major religious traditions that were surveyed, there is majority support for climate solutions, including, I think really in this moment, important to name, a multi-trillion-dollar federal economic stimulus to invest in clean energy infrastructure as part of the COVID recovery. We haven't really talked about the COVID recovery much today, but there are a lot of things that we can do through the COVID recovery. Increasing federal funding to protect vulnerable low-income communities and communities of color from immediate environmental dangers like severe flooding and hurricanes, and generating government revenue for an economic stimulus package by requiring oil, gas, and coal companies to pay a tax on their carbon pollution. I've seen a lot of questions in the Q&A around carbon pricing. So just want to name that does have wide support in the religious community. And American voters, including voters of faith, support policies that address climate change. So when we looked at this question of the COVID recovery specifically, we found that 64% of voters support a multi-trillion-dollar federal economic stimulus to invest in clean energy infrastructure as part of the COVID recovery. And that includes 72% of Black Protestant voters, 76% of non-white Catholic voters, 54% of white evangelical Protestant voters, 68% of Jewish voters, 68% of white Catholic voters, and 57% of white mainline Protestant voters. So overall, 81% of voters say fulfilling our responsibility to protect God's creation is an important reason to address climate change. So I think that is, it's a really good message to go into members of Congress, religious members of Congress with, to talk about this religious framing and how people of faith care about these issues. So IPL, along with our faith partners, created a set of faith principles, and those faith principles, the acronym FAITH, stands for Frontline Vulnerable and BIPOC Communities Must Be Supported First. We need to accelerate the transition to a clean energy economy and commit to net zero climate pollution in electricity by 2035 and economy-wide by 2050. And we know that that is pretty late. Invest in climate resilience and sustainable infrastructure. Transition our workforce to clean energy jobs with support and job training for workers. And I was really glad to hear that named by the Congressman today. And honor creation by promoting protection and conservation of public lands and oceans. So, just to kind of wrap up here, I just wanted to say, while these are not specific policy positions, they do offer clear guidance in an effort to lift all the boats and not to cater to the least common denominator. And we are looking for boldness and justice in legislation moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. Well, we're close at time, and I know, Michelle, you have to leave. So by all means, don't let us keep you. And our team is saying that they want to close close to time. And we have 2 more 2-hour sessions today ahead of us at 3 to 5, which all the major environmental groups will be there. Greenpeace and 350 and Sierra Club, and the whole lineup's going to be there. So that's exciting. I torn because I want to give us 1 more minute round just for closing thoughts. And if you could say in 30 seconds, maybe, how are we going to rope us all together? Michelle, you could go first because you have to leave first. How are we going to get the Working Families Party and the DNC, instead of having 2 fire trucks rushing to the same thing that might collide, how are we going to unite? And it doesn't have to be that pointed of a question. However you'd like to respond is fine.
Great. Welcome folks to join our coalition, dncclimate.org. We're working together. And I also think there are structural changes that can happen through the White House that will help to be coordinating everyone. So 2 recommendations the Climate Council is making is for establishing a Climate Crisis Council within the Executive Office of the President, and also establishing an interagency just transition task force, which will include farm workers, frontline communities, grassroots organizer representatives, as well as the usual suspects. Of course, we need the EPA, Health and Human Services, agriculture, and Interior in there. So thank you so much. I apologize. I'm actually running another meeting in -1 minute. So thank you so much for this opportunity to be here. It was a pleasure to be here with the other panelists.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and we'll stay in touch, and we'll hopefully coordinate on this comprehensive bill path that we're going to go down.
Looking forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, really. Damon, you want to go next?
Yeah, I actually believe the diversity of approaches to these critical questions is a strength and not a weakness. Everybody doesn't speak the same language. It's going to take different people to reach different audiences. So it's going to take many voices, many strategies to tackle this literally existential crisis that we face. And I think if we move forward with respect and humility, we can win. And so I think there can be disagreements, but I think there are some bigger enemies. And I think if we keep our eyes on that, we can allow for different approaches and different ways of speaking about these challenges. I was talking to somebody who was trying to talk to Republicans, and the first call, I cussed them out, right? I know I was talking about Jesus earlier, but I cussed them out. And then the second call, I was like, I'm glad somebody is doing that work. It's not for me. We're a nonprofit think tank. They don't want to hear from us. So fine, right? But I'm glad somebody is designed to do that work. And I think the list goes on. This is a big country. We got to talk to a lot of different people and find different ways of communicating how we get this done.
Yeah. Now I hear you on the communicating and the different strains of advocacy. I just feel like it's so splintered that we don't have collective political power of the magnitude that we would have if we could try to unite. So I feel like we need a plan to unite. I'll just leave it there for now. Rania, any last closing thoughts?
Sure. And Damon actually just really made me think of something I didn't mention in my remarks, which I usually always do, and that is how important it is to meet people where they are. And it's so easy to think that climate change and environmental justice doesn't affect me, doesn't affect my life, or, you know, I'm not in a coastal community, or I'm not a small island nation, or what, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact of the matter is I work with a lot of rural folks in the US and in other parts of the world as well. And Todd, you and I have talked about this, the idea that I'm going to go to a farmer and say, use all of the acronyms and the words and throw facts and figures, when they are really just worried about making ends meet and protecting their 100-year-old farm and not losing it. I mean, that is just, it's silly, right? It's a bit tone deaf on my end to do that. But if I can talk to them about receding soil levels and how jacked up their harvest schedule is, and all of these things that are actually direct impacts of climate change, but they may not be calling it that. And who cares? It's semantics at that point. Mm-hmm. So I just can't stress enough, meeting people where they are is so important. And I totally understand what Damon is saying. I found myself recently in a boardroom, as you know, as it works these days, and was literally asked by folks who will remain nameless, but asked by somebody, what is environmental justice? And I felt my face turn really red and I was getting super pissed off. But the fact of the matter is that's not helpful either. So I took a deep breath. I told him what, you know, I gave him sort of a sense of what it was. And it was an opportunity that I very easily could have missed if I would have just called him an idiot, which was my first reaction, but I didn't do that. So
bravo. Hey, as an activist, the hardest part sometimes is not saying what you really think. To me, that's my hardest challenge. All right, so this is wonderful. We're going to have lots of farm organizations on in the subsequent sessions. We're going to, lots of them work deeply in rural communities. So it's like all those advocacy groups that are working, we don't have to figure out the messaging for everybody. Those groups will do their own messaging in time. What we do is have to figure out how we're going to coordinate one bill that everybody likes. And Rania's work on the fossil fuels Act gives me great hope that there's already some models in play that we can work with. All right, last 30 seconds, closing thoughts. Susan, Reverend Hendershot, would you like to close us out?
Sure, Todd, thank you. Just echoing so much of what others have already said around coalition building, that it's really important for us to come together and share information and be more transparent with each other about our priorities. But really also want to echo what Devon said about, you know, the diversity of voices is our strength, and we need to continue to push on that strength as we move forward together.
Beautiful. And diversity of voices is like a chorus or an orchestra. We're all going to have our own instruments, but we got to start singing the same song sometime. So we'll figure out what that song is and get on the same wavelength, and we'll sing it all in our own keys and own renditions and own styles. And I'm going to be singing Georgia on My Mind from now until January 5th. And so if you come to the Climate Cabaret, you might get a little surprise. All right, thank you all. This has been amazing. Meeting you all, talking to you all is making my hope go through the roof. And I'm looking forward to going forward together. Thank you, everyone, and to our tech team. You all are amazing. And we'll see everybody back at 3 o'clock who can make it. We got through session 1. Yay. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Mm-hmm.